There is definitely a certain level of charm that can be found in quaint little small towns where everyone recognizes each other, where every face is familiar. When you go to the grocery store, the checker knows you by name, or the postal worker asks you about your dog because they see you walking your dog all the time, or the bank teller knows what family you come from and where you work, and everyone's just familiar. There can be a close-knit community sense that comes from that, and a sense of safety when everyone is familiar and knows each other closely in a small community like that. But unfortunately, those small communities can also lend to corruption because there can be a very easily bending of rules, or a gray area instead of black and white boundaries, personal boundaries for people's privacy rights. So for example, calling up Sue at the bank, hey, can you tell me the account balance of so-and-so? I'm just curious. Or hey, can you fax me over so-and-so's medical records? I just want to know what's going on with them. And small town gossip, smear campaigns circulate so fast in small towns as if fact. And targeting, smear campaigns, gang stalking situations can be so progressive, so rampant, so detrimental to a victim because of that small town dynamic, especially if someone influential that's respected in the community is the one leading the smear campaign, is the one behind the scenes making phone calls and doing backdoor actions, calling up a judge and asking for favors. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And unfortunately, targeting happens both in small as well as big communities. It happens all over the world, not just in the United States. But today I'm going to be speaking specifically on the brewing of corruption in a small town and what that looks like, and how it can become a normalized behavior that many community members don't even recognize their acts as being corrupt or unethical. And corruption doesn't brew overnight. It develops over time. And before you know it, an entire community will be so riddled with unethical behavior and bending of rules that it's just, this is the way we do things. This is the way we've always done it. There's nothing wrong with this. And the community members don't even see fault in acts that are actually felonies or significant crimes, because that's just part of the culture, the normalized culture, which can be so destructive, so detrimental, and those that participate really won't understand unless they experience true consequence or become the subject of that targeting and that unethical behavior and those privacy violations themselves. They're not going to really understand how destructive doing favors for one another, bending the rules, violating people's rights because you don't like them, or because you're envious of them, or you dated them in high school and you're still bitter about it, or whatever the issue may be that causes those in a small community to target someone. Maybe they don't like their faith. They don't like the way they live their life. They're just eccentric in their personality. Whatever the case may be, corruption can flourish at a very rapid rate in a small community if these certain factors are present. And the first is non-adherence to conflict of interest boundaries. So for example, in legal cases, if the judge is the next door neighbor of the defendant of a criminal case, or the appointed attorney to a defendant is, dating the brother of the defendant. When you live in a small town, there's a lot of conflict of interest situations because there's not a large pool of players to pull from, whether it's a legal situation or otherwise. And in my situation, it has been really sticky because I worked for the court system. I've worked for the district attorney. I've worked for the public defender. I've worked for advocacy agencies. I've worked for attorneys. And, any of those players targeting me are actually my former employers. So employer retaliation, conflict of interest situations that were disrespected in my targeting case. But when I worked for the court system, one of my responsibilities, I managed a certain case type, and so I would assign the case to a judge and make sure there was no conflicts there. I'd appoint attorneys for the parents, make sure there was no conflicts there. And it could be challenging because, again, with that small town dynamic, it can be hard to find people that don't have connection in some way. But it's so important that the standard be maintained regardless, that, you know, if you have to move a case to a different jurisdiction or find an attorney from a different town, then that's what I would do to ensure that that parent had appropriate representation, you know, that wasn't a friend of a friend or sleeping with so-and-so's brother or whatever the case may be. Nepotism can be a big part of corruption in a small or big town. And we often see nepotism in the workplace. You know, the big boss hires their niece to come work for the company that has no experience and spends the whole day on her cell phone and gets promoted, while people who've been there for 20 years have never gotten a raise or a promotion that are wonderful employees. That type of nepotism. And when you see it in a workplace and it's prevalent in a community, it can really cause unethical and biased experiences for other members of the community. And favoritism is the same way. So for example, oh, you come from this family, you don't have to pay your overdue library fees. Whereas, oh, you come from this family, well, you can't leave here until you pay your library dues. Or, oh, your last name is so-and-so. Yeah, you parked backward on the opposite side of the street, but we're not going to write you a ticket because we know that you come from a good family. But you, on the other hand, we don't like you. You're new to the community, so we're going to write you a really large ticket. That kind of behavior. Bigotry and intolerance can breed in communities where it's family groups that have been there for years, you know, with old school, antiquated thinking, not a lot of progression, and those community members don't get out of that area often. They don't see other views or the ways that other communities operate. They just have that narrow skew of how this community operates. And if they have old school beliefs or discriminatory views of populations, races, genders, things like that, it can be really problematic because that intolerance will flourish through the community if those people are community leaders. It just becomes acceptable that we don't like people that live different lifestyles or that are of different faiths, or you're of this faith group, we don't like that faith group in this community, but we love this faith group, things like that. And it's interesting because in the community I came from, there was often at public meetings a land acknowledgement that would be done to honor the tribes that had inhabited the lands prior to. And I always thought it was a really cool thing to be part of, to hear those land acknowledgements. And I thought it was such a respectful way to honor history and, you know, reflect on the tribes that had lived in that area, inhabited that area prior. And, you know, someone came along and said, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're not going to have these land acknowledgements at public meetings in these settings any longer. And there wasn't really a vote or an inclusive decision that was made with feedback and respecting the different tribes of the area and things like that. It was just, I don't like it, so we're getting rid of it. And often in small communities, that type of behavior someone can get away with because it's difficult to speak up against community leaders that have that bigotry mindset, that small mindset, that small town, small mindset mentality, because there's not an acceptance of progressive thought or acceptance of, well, maybe we should consider doing things in a new way or being more open-minded. It's more, this is how we do it, this is how we've always done it, and if you don't like it, leave the community. Hidden agendas can be a part of a small town. So for example, say a restaurant is trying to open up on the main street of a little town, but the decision makers are friends with a little cafe that's been there for years, and that new business could threaten the business of the friend's cafe. It could reduce their sales. So behind the scenes, they have a hidden agenda and cause all this red tape for this new business and blocking permits and making phone calls and restricting their ability to open their restaurant because they have a hidden agenda to make sure that they'll be discouraged and never open because they're trying to protect the business of their friend, that little cafe, things like that. Lack of transparency. So this is where you'll see a city council meeting that nobody knows about, that's hidden. There's no agenda. There's no information that's released to the public. Things happening behind the scenes, whether it be disciplinary action of an official, the chief of police has been suspended, but we're not telling anybody, or we're keeping it hidden. Things like that. Unethical things being swept under the rug or being hidden. Just a lack of transparency even when it comes to spending, where funds are being used in the community. Rule bending. So, the rules don't apply to you because you're so-and-so, but the rules will apply to you times 10 because you're so-and-so. Just different standards based on who you are, the family you come from, how long you've been in the community, how you're viewed in the community. You'll be treated completely different. It's not a system of equality. There's definitely gray area for certain last names in a small town community. No personal growth or identity. So say, for example, little Johnny, when he was 13, he grew up in the community, and when he was 13, he got an ATV and was racing it really fast down the streets, and everybody complained, and little Johnny was identified as being a troublemaker. Well, fast forward, little Johnny got married and had a family and became a teacher and was a great contributor to the community, and he's in his 60s now, but stay away from little Johnny. He's a troublemaker. That stigma, that branding that can happen in a small town tends to follow community members. So there's not really opportunity for them to evolve and grow or be seen in a different way once the community has labeled someone a certain way. Oh, so-and-so, they're bad because they speed all the time, or this person's an alcoholic, so they'll always be an alcoholic. And that person may have left the community and built a whole new life and reestablished themselves and done very well, and then come back in the community to visit, and they're still seen as who they were seen as when they lived in that community instead of who they actually are in real life. Unfortunately, there's not that ability to allow people to evolve and understand that people grow, people change, and in small towns it's really hard for people to be seen as who they actually are, because the community has a tendency to label and stigmatize people, or last names, or by who they're associated with, or what kind of work they do. There's even their socioeconomic status, oh, they're of the lower class, or oh, they lived in a shelter at one point, or whatever the stigma may be. Failure to address concerns. So if community members come forward and say, hey, I don't think it's fair that you're taking away the land acknowledgements. I think it's disrespectful to the tribes that are represented in this area. Or I don't think it's fair that you're hiding, notes from that city council meeting, or that this person was terminated that's a community leader, but none of us were notified that that even happened. Or why is there no transparency or failure to address us as the public that are concerned about these things happening behind the scenes that are being kept quiet? And what happens is there is solutions that don't solve, they just silence, basically. So for example, again, in this small town, they suddenly started having an issue with homelessness, where people were sleeping in doorsteps in below 0 temperatures in the winter. Not that they want to be doing that, but they're sleeping on an ice cold sidewalk because they're homeless. And so the solution of the community was not, what's going on? Do we need to build a homeless shelter? Is there not enough access to housing? Is housing not affordable? What is causing this sudden increase of homelessness in our community? Instead, the solution was, oh, we'll just fine them. We'll write them a ticket. So when they wake up frozen in 11 below 0 temperatures that they've slept on the ground in, we'll write them a fine, as if, they can pay that fine. And it's not a solution. It doesn't solve the problem. It just increases problems. And I often think to myself, those that come up with that suggestion should spend a night outside, sleep outside in the freezing cold temperatures, and then pay a ticket the next day and see if they still have the same perspective. Driving out those who don't conform to the community. So this is how we do it. This is the normalized culture of our community. You're speaking up and shedding light on things that we're doing that's unethical, we don't like that. We're going to target you and drive you out of this community. We're going to smear your name. We're going to gossip about you. We're going to call up your job and get you fired from your job. Our friends over at the law, they're going to, pull you over and say they found drugs on your possession. We're going to call the grocery store and they're going to accuse you of stealing even though you didn't. We're going to network with all of our friends. We want you out of this community because you're shedding light on all the unethical things that we're doing. You're not conforming to the way that we do things. And again, silence those who question things. So why are you causing all these problems instead of addressing the problems that are being brought to the table, those who are voicing? It's you're the problem because you're speaking about the problems and trying to silence the person that's bringing attention to issues. And the best way to silence someone is to discredit them, right? To smear their name, to try to get them charged with crimes, to say that they're a substance user, that they're mentally unstable, the typical smear campaign, so that no one will believe them when they say, hey, I heard a phone call that was really unethical, or so-and-so was doing a favor in a court case and it was skewed. When that type of person that has an issue with unethical behavior brings it to the table and then is smeared through the community, it no longer allows for the proper attention to be on the issue. Now the attention of the community member is, so I heard this about so-and-so, and you're looked at differently when you go out in public, you're harassed, it becomes normalized to follow you, and the gang stalking begins, and the whole community becomes one and united, and let's get rid of them, let's drive them out. I heard this about them, and I heard that about them. And unfortunately, smear campaigns can often involve gossip that's very dangerous to the victim, that places the victim in grave danger because of the nature of the gossip, to where people actually feel justified in causing physical harm to the targeted individual, and the community sees nothing wrong with it, and they're protecting each other. There's a culture of secrecy, and we cover for each other, we hide evidence, or we provide false reports or false testimony. It's normalized in our community. This is just how we do things. It's very dangerous. And fraud can be a big part of that. The misrepresentation of facts and information. If somebody gets on the stand to testify about someone and says, I've known them since the 5th grade. Well, you may have known them in the 5th grade, but you haven't had contact with them since the 5th grade. So what possible helpful testimony could you provide here? It's a misrepresentation, or an attorney that knowingly is filing falsified documents or forged documents, forged power of attorneys, placing someone in a fake marriage for a conservatorship, things of that nature, hidden court cases. And then you'll see, Joe at the post office, can you help us reroute their mail? And hey, Sue at the bank, can you help us get bank statements for this person so we can file them? And Joe Blow over at this doctor's office, can you help us get these HIPAA protected records, and we'll tweak them to fit our narrative? And that's where you see that networking behind the scenes of corruption, where it's just like, I'm just doing a favor for my neighbor, I'm just doing a favor for my cousin that works at this agency, or whatever the case may be. And bribery can be involved in that. If there's monetary exchange, hey, I'll pay you to this amount of money if you'll make a false police report about somebody, or help me set them up, or if you'll, record them when they're out in public, or report their whereabouts and monitor and track them, I'll give you money for that. Or I'll give you money if you allow me to install cameras outside your home to watch this person. Or I'll give you money if you give me their medical records every month and change them to match this narrative. All sorts of corrupt and unethical behavior, unfortunately. And embezzlement, the misappropriation of funds. So this is where you could see somebody who's had their inheritance stolen, and the local banker is helping open a bank account in someone's name that they know nothing about, or putting money in overseas accounts to hide it, hiding it and funneling money to clean it through a church group. All kinds of horrible embezzlement acts. And really, at the end of the day, in a small community, the goal is to win at all costs, to protect the larger community, or more so the main players, the leaders of the community, at the expense of whoever's being targeted. And it could be a targeting because they've spoken up about unethical things, corruption. You know, me working with victims as an advocate, I often had to say things that, you know, hey, this is not appropriate. This victim's being re-victimized, or this is unethical, or why did this attorney get appointed? They're dating this sibling, or, you know, if you speak up and shed light on things like that, you certainly become a target in a corrupt community. But it also could be because of discrimination. You know, we don't like the lifestyle you live, we don't like your faith, we don't like your skin color. You know, in our community, we're predominantly this race, so we drive out anybody that's different. We don't like homeless, so we're gonna find them and hopefully they'll go away too, because they're making our community look bad. You know, it becomes this is our culture, this is what we're familiar with, this is what's comfortable to us, and we will do what's necessary to maintain that status quo at the expense of those that are nonconformists, that don't fit the bill of what we see in our antiquated views. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with that kind of dynamic, it's very difficult to clean up that level of corruption because it's been ingrained for generations. It's long-term. Everyone in the community is involved in some way. It's a normalized part of the culture. You know, you just call up the hospital and they'll alter a medical record, or you just call up the bank, or you call up this attorney and they'll doctor something up. And as somebody who's experiencing corruption and unethical treatment in that kind of dynamic, the more you speak up, the more you're going to be attacked, the more you're going to be gang-stalked, because it's that win at all costs, protect the leaders, protect the large players mentality. And it's hard to clean up. It's hard to survive once you're being targeted in that dynamic, because there is a lack of accountability, there is a lack of oversight. And until those players who are engaging in corrupt acts are held legally accountable for their crimes, or experience and are subjected to them themselves and get a firsthand taste of what it's like to be treated unethically, to have privacy violations, to be targeted, to be gang-stalked, to have your rights violated, there's just very little chance of cleanup without a major cleanup. And in my case, I just found it best to leave that community because it was so largely populated with the corruption. I mean, churches were involved down to the barber. You know, everybody was playing a role in monitoring, tracking, gang stalking, false narratives, false statements, and it just became, there was nowhere safe to turn. And that unfortunately will happen in a small town much faster than in a big city, because of the way gossip circulates and the way people are so quick to jump on board in these smear campaigns and targeting situations without doing their own fact checking, without choosing to step back and not participate in large-scale bullying, large-scale gang stalking. And it's really unfortunate, because there's something so beautiful about a small town that's close-knit, that's safe, and that treats everyone well, where everyone can feel like they're welcomed and needed and an important part of the community that's safe and ethical.